Hello and welcome to the ☍𝕍𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣 Witchcraft podcast. I believe it's episode 107. And it's called Felements. What's up with these fake elements, Chris? Is it like these fake witches? Fake elements? Do they go hand in hand with fake witches and crushed velvet?
No, we're talking about tricking an element into behaving in a different way or forcing it to behave in a different way. That actually requires real skill rather than fake skill.
So is this like elements in drag?
Yes.
So water dresses up as fire or something like that?
Yes.
I see.
So the sort of things those Wiccans wouldn't realise has happened. They'd be totally fooled by the illusion.
Okay.
So the Wiccans are walking up to the drag queen and going, "Right, love, want a party?"
So we're at some kind of, I don't know, award ceremony, right, for acting and shit. And someone wins an award. Who wins an award? Dame Judi Dench. She wins an award, right? And they call her name. And some geezer in a skirt, somewhat unconvincing, walks up the stage and tries to accept the award on her behalf.
Yes, I think that's what we're talking about. Although I don't think you're allowed to call a drag artist some geezer in a skirt.
Well, no, because it might be a woman dressing up as a man.
Equally.
Yeah. Right, okay. But Dame Judy's a woman, and if it was drag, then it would be a man dressed up as Judi Dench, wouldn't it?
Potentially, yes.
Is there such a thing as double drag, Chris? You would know this because you used to be, I don't know if you still are, but you used to be well up with all the GLBGB, EBGB alphabet stuff, weren't you? Right?
Yes.
So is there a thing as a man doing drag dressed up as a woman that's dressed up as a man?
Yes. You also get vice versa as well. You can get women who do drag, because drag is a persona. It's got nothing to do with gender.
Yeah. So because this isn't like a transgender or anything like this. This is more like costume and acting, isn't it?
This is acting.
Like a stage show, like a cabaret.
Yeah. It's not actual persona in that sense. It's a fabricated one.
So you dress up as a female person that is a parody of someone else. So like if there was a drag queen or a drag king or something like that was famous, if you dressed up as them, technically you'd be dressing up as someone that's dressing up as someone else.
Yes.
Right?
You'd be parodying a parody.
Parodying a parody, that is it. Parodying a parody. So how is this relevant to Felements, fake ass elements? Because some of these drag queens can be quite convincing, I think.
Very.
You would not know. I watched this thing. It was a TV show. It was rather shit, but there wasn't really much on iPlayer at the time, and I needed something that I kind of almost wanted to watch, but didn't want to watch, because otherwise it would distract me from doing my work. And I like to have background noise on, growing up in a house with 13 kids, I need like constant noise, because otherwise things feel like the end of the world, apocalypse, like them fucking Left Behind books my dad used to make me read. Shout out to the Dark Pastor. I'm sure she'd know what these Left Behind books are about. I bet she's read them all at Soul Survivor or something. But yeah, so fake ass elements, getting an element to behave like another element. Now, we've set homework to people before in order to do that, but it's not about, let's understand how something such as fire could behave in a liquid kind of watery form. Oh, look, lava. It's not like that, is it?
No, we're not talking about where it actually exists. We're actually talking about one masquerading as another.
We're talking about fuckery, aren't we?
Yes, we're talking about fuckery of the highest order.
Yes, magical fuckery of the, I wouldn't say highest order, I would say intermediate level fuckery.
In natural magic, it's probably a fairly high order.
Probably, but you know, let's be fair. So, if you wanted to do some magical fuckery, we know that people think about the universe and its building blocks in the form of elements to try to categorize them. We also know that elemental magic, and by elemental magic we mean like the 4 classical elements, not elemental as in your first love spell, not like simple as in elemental. But elemental magic is in that's your system of magic, I suppose you could say. How would you mess about with someone's elemental structure of magic? So if you've got someone that, as they do, like our well, I wouldn't say it's our friend, our nemesis isn't really too strong a term. Our
annoyance.
I was going to say our go-to clown, Lady Snake. If she was to go and do some sort of ritual, she does like this elemental work, doesn't she? So she evokes the elements as some kind of protection, like casts a magical circle of protection and such. So when she's calling out them gnomes or calling out them elements and salamanders and all that shit, what if, Chris, we made the gnome dress up as a salamander and try to convince her that it's a salamander? So the salamanders, I think, is it the gnomes are earthy, and the salamanders would be fiery, yeah?
Yes.
Earth and fire. So what if when she calls earth, the element of earth, in whatever fucking direction she's decided to call, whatever one on her, whatever direction the compass on her iPhone's told her to point into. What if the gnome pops up, but it is not a gnome? No, sorry, she's calling the gnome element in Earth, in the quadrant of Earth, or whatever the fuck, the corner, because obviously circles have corners, don't they? Apparently. What if a fire salamander shows up, but it's wearing a gnome costume and it's dressed up as a gnome, and it turns up in the Earth quarter, Earth section? Would Lady Snake notice? Or do you think she's not psychic enough? Do you think she's like the old lady that looks at someone and says, "Are you a man or a woman?" Like my nan used to do that when she went to hospital. When she went to hospital, she'd go, "I don't like that man over there. I don't like that man over there." I'm like, "Nan, that's a woman. You're in the woman's ward." It's like, "Well, it's got a beard." It's like, "Oh my gosh, you can't say that." She says things so loudly as well, you know. It's like, it's so embarrassing. Poor person. You don't want to be basically on your deathbed in an old person's ward and basically being called like by the woman opposite, like, "Oh, you're ugly, you look like a man and you've got a beard," you know. I mean, you're going through cancer. That's enough, surely. But anyway, yeah, Lady Snake, would she tell the difference between a genuine gnome and a salamander dressed up as a gnome?
I don't think she would, and that's not dissing her amazing power.
Kind of is, though.
That she clearly has over the Mars bar.
Hey, that's some level planetary magic. The gobbler of planets. Lady Snake. I have conquered Mars. You mean you ate a Mars bar on the way? Yes, that's what I meant. And now I will conquer the entire galaxy.
It's one of those really big bars.
Is no match for Lady Snake. The destroyer of galaxies.
So she, I don't think when she calls that she's looking for them to arrive. So this is one of my big issues with corner calling or tower calling, is they don't wait for a response.
Yes.
You know, it's a, you know, I call the watchtowers of the east, power of whatever they decide to put there. Is that kind of issue for me, is they don't wait for that torch to go on. The whole point of a watchtower is that it's a lighthouse. So a torch should light in that space to say someone's in. So when you're working around that circle, you should be lighting those centers up. Those corners need to be occupied. And obviously, I'm not convinced. Bearing in mind, she, you know, it might have been editing, but she didn't call all of them by name, which makes me think that she didn't know who lives in that watchtower. Those air ones, she she didn't name. So maybe she doesn't know who's in that watchtower there. So I would think that she's not waiting for a call and response. So bearing in mind, that's the whole point of chanting aloud, is that it is a call and response. But the response should be coming from something etheric, and it's not. So when she's going around in a rhythm that she must have, you know, I've checked the door 3 times, is what she's doing. Going through the shopping list and checking that she's closed the door 3 times over, habitually, rather than actually experiencing those centers lighting up. So yes. So rather than just saying the Mars bar eating destroyer of galaxies isn't very good, I thought I'd give an explanation. Happy?
That's very interesting explanation. Now, we don't know a huge amount about this person's practice. For those that don't know who Lady Snake is, we may have taken the piss out of her a little bit on the Feisty Witches YouTube show that you can watch in the Witchcraft Live Facebook group that's live every week, I think. With basically a magical practitioner, a witch that was asked to go on a paranormal television show and do some kind of evocation, or an invocation of a succubus. But she decided to evoke some elements, presumably for protection or to make something happen. I don't know. Presumably it's just what the book told her to do. Who knows? There is one thing that I would say, is that obviously when it comes to elemental magic, people think about it in a different way. Different traditions and practitioners use them in different ways. She could have potentially been using it as like a calibration. So it's like on your marks, get set, go. So like you have things like the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, ceremonial magicians like, that banishes. But then you also have things like the Celtic cross and that is like an alignment thing.
Yeah.
One could potentially, it might sound or look like they're calling the elements, but what it might be is potentially they're attuning themselves to that element. So when they say, I call upon this, they're not actually trying to pull the energy in. They're thinking kind of like on your marks, get set, go. Like I've been watching the Commonwealth Games, and like I watched the swimming, and they've got like that beep, 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 where you've got the first beep, you crouch down, the second beep, you put your legs in the stirrups, and the third beep, you kind of go. Yeah. So kind of like you're tuning yourselves into these big energies that are surrounding it. Because when people call energies and elements and stuff like that, like I think from my perspective, I don't call on them, and I wouldn't call on them. What I'd be doing is I'd be thinking, well, from the elemental perspective, all things are created from the elements. Therefore, they're already here. One does not have to call them. They're here. You know, it's like calling oxygen into the room that you're in that's full of fucking oxygen, right? So really what you're trying to do is attune yourself to that energy, to pick it out, to say, where's the earthy energy here? What's it doing? What's the airy element energy here? What's it doing? So it's like an attention thing. I'm tuning in, I'm reading the area. That would be how I would do it if I was forced to cast a Wiccan circle. I wouldn't be pulling in energy. I would just be trying to tune myself into and read the atmosphere. So for me, it's not like I'm pulling in this energy to make it do something. I'm like, what is going on in this area and what do I need to change? Is the airy kind of element, is something up with that? Does it need cleaning? Does it need a realignment? Is there an unbalance here? Because we look at these kind of rituals and they're supposed to look kind of balanced. I mean, there's a circle, there's 4 of them, they're all, done in certain orders and stuff. Balance is important. But no, I suppose going back to the original question, you don't think that if a elemental, so a personification energy stream, if the energy of an element, the elemental force of fire, decided for shits and giggles, or maybe you forced it to pretend to be or appear as Earth, you don't think Lady Snake would notice?
No, and my reason for that was exactly that, is that the way in which she was calling them, I assumed it was the first kind, not what you're talking about, which is calibration. What I see that as watchtowers in the traditional sense, which is because she named them.
Yes.
So the assumption that because she named them, she was calling in somebody to represent those corners, which was my assumption. The bit that confused me was she didn't call all of them, which may have been editing. But it was just a case of, well, actually, if she did call them, she didn't wait for a response. She assumed they would arrive promptly.
Did you get the impression
checking?
Did you get the impression watching her do it that she had any psychic ability? Because it can require, I think, psychic ability in order to do that, but at the same time you can have physical manifestations. So if you do pull in or utilize and kind of jig up fire in a room or in an area, then potentially the room can get hotter. You can have physical manifestations, or the candles might start going crazy, So do you think that she did kind of like some BS evocation standard ritual, but just couldn't sense what she was doing? Like she was playing what is that game that you used to play, Crash Bandicoot or something?
Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah. Was she playing Crash Bandicoot on the Nintendo with the television screen switched off?
Yeah, essentially. She was pressing buttons and not waiting for or expecting a response.
So she thinks, I know which buttons to press in the right order. I'll go through the motions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's just looking at her in terms of practice. Again, we didn't see the whole ritual from start to finish. We saw an edited part, but ultimately the way in which she was addressing them, there was a long enough clip to go from one to the next for me to go, you didn't wait for a response, and you didn't look like you were expecting one either, which says that either you weren't calibrating, which is what you're talking about, or that you weren't aware of the presence of those individuals. It was more I've learned to say these things at the start of casting. So for me, if the gnomes were appearing as a salamander, she wouldn't know any different. So, but you would hope that somebody who was actually adept at that, and actually, third degree or something, would actually be able to recognize that they were doing one of those two things. They were either calling in or they were calibrating, and that they should be able to tell the difference between those two. And know that what those energies are, where they should be. But then that would also assume that people adjust their, oh God, I'm going to say it now, compass accordingly when they are somewhere else. So, if you were to go and do, there are, again, down to these two modes of thought that we're talking about. Obviously, it can be a lot more complicated than that. But if you are separating into the two, you're either calibrating in accepting that they are there, and it doesn't matter in which order or what direction you are calling, or there is the watchtower expression, which truly done should represent those bodies in those places. So if suddenly you're somewhere different and that large body of water that you normally refer to as that particular watchtower is no longer there and is on the other side, so should your compass turn in order to represent that's where you are, because that part is about expressing where you are in the world and calling in your backup from that direction that they exist in, and having that awareness of where that is, rather than just saying, you know, water is always in the west or whatever.
So let's make some assumptions so we can carry on with the conversation. So let's assume that this lady snake was trying to call on like an evocation. So she was trying to evoke and pull in a elemental from each of the 4 classical elements. So she was trying to call upon and pull in a sentient elemental spirit. So let's just assume that. Now, why does she want to do that? I'm presuming that it is a case of it's a beginning of a ritual. She wants energy, you know, like when you go off to Las Vegas, you need currency in order to pay your way, to go and do the gambling, go and do what you went there to do, pay for the hotel room and stuff. So with the ritual, she's going to be expending energy. She's going to be doing something magical. Therefore, she wants to pull in some currency, some magic to start with. So if she's pulling those elements in, she understands elements, presumably. Otherwise, why wouldn't she just pull something else in? I mean, why wouldn't she just have a look what's in the room and just use what's already there, you know? I'm going to presume that, well, because she would see it as elements are there everywhere, she's just going to do a generic energy boost, you know, at the start of a ritual. So if she's doing that, how do you think, or how would you describe to a beginner that she is able to do that? So why is it that when she just says earth gnomes come to me, that actually happens? Or doesn't it happen? I don't know. I mean, you could take the piss out of her and say, well, nothing's fucking happening, love, but you know.
Yeah, well, the expectation would be that this is a practiced individual who has built a response and a relationship with those individuals. Obviously, from our point of view, you could argue that all the elements are present in the candle she lit.
Yeah.
So actually, she didn't need to call any because they were all available. You'd physically got them present. So all you were doing was activating and calibrating what's already there. I didn't get the impression that that's what she was doing, hence why I've laid it pretty thick about the fact that she's actually expecting them to turn up, which would say she either has and exists, or at least should have a working relationship with these spirits in order to, because that's where my argument normally, when it comes to the ceremonial magicians, is where we're talking about, oh, well, you've just called Samuel in. So I'm expecting you either know Samuel or he's expecting to be called in. Otherwise, you're just shouting somebody's name in as an empty threat, which is what we talked about before. Bearing in mind she was about to do what she considered to be a dark setup, I'm assuming she was calling these in for protection to hold their quarters, in which case you would expect that she's wanting them to turn up.
So they're the cavalry, is that what you're saying? Because she calls, she has some, because she said God and Goddess protect Lady Snake or something like that, didn't she? So she had a little altar set up and she was cowering next to it at one point during the ritual, practically scared to death. So they were presumably there to do the like big work as her bodyguards, I guess. I don't really know. I'm not a Wiccan. But the idea that she's calling upon these or pulling in these energy forces, what I'm interested in is you've done the call and response thing. So it's kind of like if she puts enough effort and work in time and time again, it's literally like, oh, the phone's ringing, the caller ID says it's Lady Snake, she's a friend, I'll show up, right?
Yes.
What we would argue is that why would you call your friend up if they're already in the room because of the elements already around them? But what you would do, I'll give you, if the person's in the room, they're over the other side of the room, or they're not paying attention to you, you would say, "Oi, you." You know, you'd say the person's name. You say, "Lady Snake, Lady Snake." You know, so I can understand
Stand
that.
here.
From a logical perspective, I can understand getting someone or something's attention if it's already in the room, right? This is where it gets interesting. We'll have to go into it in more detail on the extended edition of this on the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon. But we as nasty witches, on occasion, we like to fuck with people. Generally speaking, fuck with people to teach them a lesson. So it may be rude, immoral, unethical, but who cares? If you were to test Lady Snake, you could think of a multitude of different tests for her, but one of the amusing ones, given that she's doing an elemental ritual, would potentially be to mess about with the elements in some way, shape, or form. So there's a couple of things you could potentially do, and on the extended edition, I'd like to go into how you personally would go about doing each one, or which one you would choose as personal preference. But the first thing you could do is when she calls on the salamanders, them just not fucking show up. So you've blocked that energy from being present in the ritual. That would be the first thing. Caller ID block, right? So that would be interesting to see if she would be able to overcome that. It would also be interesting to see whether she'd even fucking notice. Because if you have got a little bit of a buzz with your earth and your air and your water, but then there's no fire, where the fuck is the fire? It just didn't show up, or is very flat. That seems very strange. Well, Chris has put out, you snuffed out your flame, Lady Snake. You know, potentially. Second one would be where she calls the energy forms in and expects them to be, like as a placeholder, you fuck about with it and move them about. So when she's calling one element, another one shows up. He's not necessarily pretending to be that another element or behaving like another one, but first
just changing the caller ID.
He's calling it into the candle flame that is in the, you know, in one direction of the room or in one corner of the room, but actually when it turns up, it's behind her in the other corner. That would be amusing. See if she notices that. The third thing, because 3 is a magic number, is that when she does pull up the energy or tries to pull it in, is that you do actually somehow make them all pretend to be each other. So when she calls fire, like we said, it turns up pretending to be earth. Now, some people wouldn't be able to get their heads around that, but you are dealing with spirits. So is it your idea of how sentient elemental energy is? Because an elemental is kind of like the spirit equivalent of a specific element, isn't it? So there's, to a certain extent, some form of intelligence, but also it acts a certain way, it behaves and manifests a certain way. So what would, before we go into the extended edition, which one of those 3 would you pick, or is there a 4th that you pick to fuck about with Our Lady Snake?
I would probably, because it would be I would see it the easiest way to do it would be to get 4 air spirits to pretend to be the 4, rather than going, you're all going to swap places. That just seems like more work.
Right.
To me, it would be like, okay, well, she's going to call in cardinals because she can't help herself. She's Wiccan. So cardinal winds could turn up and all pretend to be somebody else, because one, they'd enjoy it, or at least that's my experience of them.
Yeah.
Let's just say my experience of air spirits don't really care for gender. So, you know, it would, to me, that wouldn't be a problem. Secondly, I think that would require less work and coordination than trying to get all the elements to swap places. But yes, so typical me, you give me 2 options and I give you a third.
I gave you 3 options, you gave a 4th. Now they've got 4 options. It's brilliant. Right, that's it for this edition of the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast. If you want to listen to what we're talking about next, this extended edition, which goes on for at least another half an hour, get on the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon.